My best friend's kids. We can't, their kids, they was the next.
Y'all can hear.
Okay, we're ready to continue our study of the book of Numbers tonight. I'm sure most of you saw Stuart's email. Craig was planning on being here, prepared to be here, but circumstances have caused that not to be possible. We need to remember him and his mother especially. And so he called me about 5 o'clock and asked me to lead the discussion, and so that's going to have to be a discussion. So let's have a word of prayer. Father, as we begin tonight a study of your book, we ask your help. We ask for your guidance, and we ask for your direction in helping us to not only look at the facts, but to try and see what your intent was in giving them to us. Help us, Father, to open our minds and our willingness to speak to one another in this class and help one another to come to a fuller spiritual growth. And in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, last week we looked at several things, time and geography and everything. But as we begin a look at the scriptures themselves, what do you see, or what kind of questions or thoughts do you have concerning the book in general? Maybe any questions about what we covered last week? Anything? Is there any thoughts?
I think what I know for myself was that Numbers was written for the Israelites, not the children. But as I could read through Numbers, there's so much of it that matches our relationship with God directly now. He was into the promised land then, and he leading us to the promised land. And I see so many similarities that apply both to the New Testament church and to the Israelite context.
So Anita's point, if you didn't hear, that the physical representation of God leading these chosen people to the promised land surely is a parallel for us in that he is leading us, his chosen people, to the promised land. There's an analogy there that's very obvious, but oftentimes we don't take the time to look at it. Is there any specifics, Anita, that you see in that analogy that would be helpful for us?
Okay, one on top of my head is where he's giving the laws for the Israelites, and he said, and this is for the sojourner also. It's like now, in the Genesis, for the Jews and the Gentiles, it was the same law. It's the same law, just little things like that. I can see the similarities.
Okay. Anybody else in that vein?
And another one is, whenever Moses had a problem, rather than just fix himself, he always went to God. And we always look to the scripture to get our answer. Always go to God.
That's true, with maybe one exception. At the waters of Meribah, when the people complained, we have no water, did Moses go to God? He did. And he told him what? He told him to speak to the rock, right? He took his staff and struck it twice. And so Moses was, I don't know what Moses was. Punished, disqualified, just a minute. But at the Mount of Transfiguration, who came and ministered to Jesus? Moses and Elijah, right? Isn't that an indication that Moses was in the good graces of God? So, now next one.
Another thing that struck me when I said this is whenever Moses was always intervening, he was always going to God on his behalf. And then whenever the 12 tribes went in, and they were kill Moses and Aaron and have to take it back. God was definitely said, I'm done. They're not going to promise. And Moses intervened again. But this time, God didn't say everything's good. He said, I forgive you. You're still not going to. And I think that is something we do get to do some sins that we feel consequences.
Okay, that's an interesting thought. You have to kind of work through that. Kitty?
It shows us how important it is to follow God and to follow his laws.
Important to follow God and his laws. That's
Yeah,
right.
and that's
Sure.
a good book to go for.
Yes. Here's one that I've thought about a lot of times. If you go over to Exodus 23, and this is, I don't have an answer for this. In Exodus 23, God is telling the Israelites how it's going to be, how He's going to lead them in conquest of the land of Canaan. In verse 22, if you truly obey His voice and do all that I say, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries. For my angel will go up before you and bring you into the land of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, and I will completely destroy them. And you shall, well, let's see, skip down a little bit. Verse 27, I will send my terror ahead of you and throw into confusion all the people among whom you come, and I will make all your enemies turn their backs to you. I will send hornets ahead of you so that they will drive out the Hivites, the Canaanites, the Hittites before you. I will not drive them out before you in a single year, that the land may not become desolate and the beasts of the field become too numerous. I will drive them out before you little by little until you become fruitful and take possession of the land. So just that description that God gives these Israelites is that I will be before you. I will drive the people out before you, the hornets, my power, my angel will go before you. And yet when they get there, He sends the spies into the land to do what? To check out the fortifications, to see what type of people are before Him. And then when they come back, His expectation of these people is what? To just strap on your swords and get ready because we're going to war. Now that description over in Exodus 23 was, I will go before them and drive them out. But His expectation was that they were to do something. It was not going to, the land was given to them, right? Basically, He had promised them, it was a done deal. But He expected them to do something, right? I think that's illustrative of our relationship with God. He gives us the promised land. It is ours right now. We have salvation. But He doesn't expect us to just sit down and wait for it. We've got to do something. We've got to strap on the sword and get about doing the will of the work, the warfare, Ephesians 6, the warfare that He's led us to. Stuart?
I think also the same kind of thing that you see with Abraham being tested. God had already promised Abraham that Isaac was going to be the promised son. Already made these promises that, pertaining to Isaac. And yet, God tested Abraham and said, I want you to take your son, your only son, go to this mountain, I'm going to show you, you don't need to sacrifice. Same kind of thing here. God tested Abraham. I want you to take 12 spies over to the land. I already told you what's going to happen. And how it's going to happen. You think? But people did. That was the end result of that. 12 spies came back and said, oh, we're too big, we're like grasshoppers, we can't do this. And 2 of them said, yes, we can, let's go. The Lord, we got the Lord on our side. What are we waiting for? And I think those are lessons for everyone, as we talked about. Regardless of what goes on around us, we still have a responsibility to act on the test that's given to us.
Absolutely. Lori?
Well, talking about the testing, God used everything to test them and evidence, but I think also where God, His wisdom is when He knew that they couldn't be pushed that far. When they left, it says in Exodus 13, when they started on their route, God knew that they could go along the road with Philistines, even though it was nearby, but God said, no, we're going to change their mind and want to go back to Egypt if we go that way, so I'm going to send them a different route. Like God knew then how far He could push them and how much they could take. And just like today, God's not going to give me anything that I can't handle, but be with me the whole time about what I can handle.
Okay. All right. Anybody else?
Tommy,
Danny?
well, to me, the whole book is awesome how God knows every single person, how many thousands of people from each tribe, man of 20 for war, etc., in such detail. You know, factual things to, you know, when you number all these people,
You say he knows them, or?
well, he knows how many from each tribe and such. The number-
Okay, all
The
right.
exact number, what, 603,000 total, whatever.
So why'd they have to count them, Danny? They had to take a census, and they came up with 603,000. Well, who was that for? Was that for God, or was that for the people?
Of course, the Levites were to serve in battle,
Right?
so he excluded them.
Anita?
I think that you were concerned about this, I think it's for the people, because God promised Abraham, I will make your descendants more than the city. And all the 7 people came, went down into Egypt, and you had 1 million coming down. That was just the beginning of his promise to Abraham. I think people need to see that.
Okay. And think about the people that came out of the land of Egypt were of what culture, what mindset, what social strata, what were they, how capable were they of conquest?
They were slaves.
They were slaves. What does that infer, Janet?
They were used to people just telling them what to do and being inferior.
Yeah, maybe I was going to say some things that were probably wrong, so I'll not do that. But all of the negatives that go with being a slave your whole lifetime. Someone constantly telling you what to do and when to do it, and not receiving too many of the benefits of society, probably not a lot of education, probably not well cared for, food was maybe a little scarce. Work was doubly hard because Pharaoh took the straw away, so made them go get their own straw to make bricks. Think about that societal influence on these million people who were marching out of Egypt. And God said, within a year, you're going to strap on a sword and you're going to march into the land of Canaan, and there's going to be 10-foot tall giants there, and I'm going to have you slay them or drive them out and completely take over the land. Now, we could maybe, oftentimes we put them in a negative light and say they had no faith. They saw all the miracles that God had done before they left Egypt and after they left Egypt, and when they got to the promised land, they should have been totally convinced that it was theirs. Yes, I agree. But they had to undergo some transformation in mindset, in belief in themselves, trust in God. Remember, before this, we don't really know what their relationship with God was. So, that's one thing to keep in mind. It also relates to the first couple of chapters of the book. We talked last week of how you could divide the book up into basically 3 sections. In the first 10 chapters, 1 through 10, where are they?
Sinai.
They're sitting at Mount Sinai. How long had they been there? How long had it been since they left Egypt? About a year. We looked at last week, and I said some things last week that were incorrect, but pardon me, please. The travel was approximately 3 months from Egypt to Mount Sinai, and now here in the opening of the book of Numbers, it says in verse 1, in the first of the 2nd month, in the 2nd year. So there they were 13 months from leaving Egypt, 3 months travel, and apparently 10 months now at Mount Sinai. And when do they leave Mount Sinai? Again, we looked last week on Numbers chapter 10, verse 11. Now in the second year, in the second month, on the 20th of the month, the cloud was lifted. The sons of Israel set out on their journey from the wilderness of Sinai. So here at the beginning of the book, it is the second year, second month, first day. And they leave on the second year, second month, and 20th day. So the first 10 chapters cover a period of 20 days. So within that 20 days, the writer Moses tells us about a lot of organization that goes in to getting these people, former slaves, transforming them into an organized mob. So when they take off, they march in a particular order, and when they camp, they march in a particular arrangement. And those are, I don't know if there's any significance other than God tells them to do it in a specific way. He talks about that in the second chapter. Let's go back to the first chapter. The first chapter is primarily a numbering of the men, age 20 and over. And it says, men of war. Take a census of all the congregation of the sons of Israel by their families, by their father's household, according to the number of names, every male, head by head, from 20 years old and upward, whoever is able to go out to war in Israel. And you, Aaron, shall number them by their armies. So God is telling them, identify the men who are capable of fighting. Criteria, 20 years and older, able to go to war. Why is that? Well, obviously the organization, the necessity of fighting a battle when they get there, going to necessitate identifying who they are, right? And in the identification, he is appointing the head of each one of those groups, a head from every tribe. So he's establishing a military and a military hierarchy. Do you see anything in there that's significant or interesting to you?
Simeon,
What about Simeon, Anita?
that he had such a big decrease, and we want to go back to Simeon's sin. But eventually his sisters left.
Simeon was involved in the Shechem debacle.
We've got Reuben, and he had his father's wives, and Simeon and Levi that were in that Shechem debacle. And Reuben, Simeon, and Levi also were taken out of the blessing of Abraham. So I'm wondering if part of Simeon was a fulfillment of consequences of punishment.
So Anita's wondering why there's such a decrease between the first census, the first column, and the second census, which was taken when, time-wise? When was the second census? 38 years later, okay? Or just before they go into the promised land, anyway, 38 years later. So Simeon is the greatest one, of course. Reuben is down a little bit. Most, if not all the rest of them, no. Ephraim is down 8,000 also. Naphtali is down 8,000. What happens in chapter 25? The second census is in chapter 26. Chapter 25, well, 22, 23, 24, 25 are all about what? Sharon? Baal. Remember that the king of Moab tries to hire Balaam to come in and curse the nation of Israel who are coming towards them, marching towards him, and he's heard all the stories about how they just take over, or just a swarm who cannot be stopped, and so he hires Balaam to come, and Balaam instead, through the will of God, through the providence of God, blesses the people of Israel. And then leaves. In the story of Numbers, in the book of Numbers, he leaves, but later on we hear that he actually tells the Moabites and apparently the Midianites, who were part of them or one of their allies, the way you can get to them. I can't help you. God won't let me curse them, but the way you can get to them is you can entice them to worship Baal, to commit idolatry, and God will be so angry with them that he will not allow them to prosper. And that's what happens. And then we remember in chapter 25 the story of how the people played the harlot with the daughters of Moab, and God sent a plague among them. Verse 9, those who died by the plague were 24,000 people. Within that story, it says that that Moses called the leaders of all of the tribes to come together and said, God is not happy with your involvement with Baal of Peor. He is going to execute judgment on you. So to placate him, you need to take all the leaders of the people and execute them in broad daylight before the Lord, verse 4, so that the fierce anger of the Lord may turn away from Israel. So Moses said to the judges of Israel, each of one of you slay his men who have joined themselves to Baal of Peor. So we have this convocation of Moses, and apparently those of the tribes who had not committed adultery, committed idolatry. And he says, we got to do something. We need to kill everybody who's guilty. And in the midst of that, right in the middle of that, then behold, one of the sons of Israel came and brought to his relatives a Midianite woman in the sight of Moses and in the sight of all the congregation of the sons of Israel, while they were weeping at the doorway of the tent of meeting. This guy, one of the Israelites, brings a Midianite woman, parades her right through the middle of this group, and takes her to his tent and starts to commit adultery with her. Just brazenly, high-handedly say, I don't care. And you remember Phinehas became so enraged and jealous for God, he took his javelin, went into the tent, and pinned them both to the ground. We know that story, right? That man's name was Zimri, the son, no, that was the woman. Zimri, a Midianite woman, but the man was, Zimri was the Israelite, son of Salu, a leader of the father's household among the Simeonites. So some people think that Simeonites were kind of prominent in this idolatry. This man that had done this brazen, high-handed thing was a Simeonite, probably a leader of the tribe. And 24,000 people died from the plague, God's punishment. So maybe that's reflected in this greatest loss of tribe of men from the tribe of Simeon. I think it's probable. Okay, back to the census. Anything else you see in there that's interesting?
I think one of the interesting things is the tribe of Dan. It's the next largest tribe as far as number of people. And yet, when you read the story of what happened after they entered the land and how they didn't fight, they didn't stand up and die, they kind of kicked out, went, found another place to live, things of that nature, it was just like, wow. Just so God blessed them numerically. But they, read the story of them later and how unfaithful they were. Compared that to Judah, who was, the largest tribe of all, and yet, consistently, they had their ups and downs, but consistently, you find men would keep, men who strive to do what God wanted them to do, over time, maybe not all the time. You got David who was faithful, you got Josiah who was faithful, Hezekiah was faithful. So there were faithful men who rose up from the tribe of Judah, but apparently none today.
Can you think of any famous Danites? It's a good point. Wasn't Samson a Danite? I believe. He wasn't necessarily a good guy, though. What else do you see in there? Anything?
Hey, Tom, I was wondering, the Levites were given charge of taking care of the tabernacle, put it up, bring it down, carry the stuff inside of it, etc. But do we know how many people that was?
Yes. In chapter 3, there's a census of the Levites. Over in chapter 3, verse 27, every male of the Kohathites from a month old and upward were 8,600. In verse 34, the Merarites, how do you say that? Merarites, 6,200. And the Gershons, where were they? Anybody see that? I don't have it marked. How many Gershons are there?
2,630 something. Read it.
Where? Okay,
Well, Tommy, verse 39.
7,500.
In verse 39, 22,000 Levites.
Right, 22,000. And then we have a census right in the same chapter where God numbers the firstborn male of the sons of Israel from a month old and upward. How many of those were there? Okay, let's stop first and get it clearly in our minds. God tells him to number the Levites age a month old and upward. Why would that be, a month old for a Levite? Because he's going to trade them for the firstborn, right? So he's numbering them based on the same common denominator, a month old and upward. So how many Levites? 22,000. And how many firstborn of all the Israelites, a month old and upward?
20,273.
Okay. Does that make sense to you? There's something going on there that I don't think we understand, because there's 1 million or maybe even up to 2 million Israelites total. And out of that horde, there's only 22,000 babies a month old, or firstborn a month old and upward. It seems almost, you have thought?
I
Sharon?
don't know education comments, but it seems like it's part of the redemption, is that it's almost the first act of redemption that you see that God uses to say, okay, I'm going to buy you back. And it's going to come into play later on with Jesus buying us back.
Mm-hmm.
But they all belong to the Lord. But instead of you doing whatever, or me killing you as the sacrifice, we're going to use these Levites who are going to be in service to us, to me, on your behalf, as a redemption.
Right. Or the firstborn were his. He could have, the animals he took as sacrifices. The men he would have just dedicated to his service, right? Kind of like Samuel. His mother took him and gave him to the priest at the tabernacle and said, he's yours now. He lives here now. He's yours. That's what so God took the Levites to do that, to come and serve him in exchange for the people that were already his, which were the firstborn of every male. The numbers are a little bit odd. I don't really have an answer. Some people suggest that this is the number of firstborn since they left Egypt. Because remember, God had already claimed the firstborn at the first Passover. He said, those are mine there because I didn't kill them. You put blood on the doorpost and therefore they're still alive, but they're mine, the firstborn. So maybe he took, I don't know. I don't have an answer, but maybe this number represents the firstborn since that first Passover.
Hey, Tom.
Yeah.
The only other thing I thought about would be, since this is right after they left Egypt, or soon thereafter, that was about the time that the Egyptians were killing off all the firstborn males, all the baby boys anyway, right?
Yes, sir.
So these really decreased numbers could be because there just weren't that many that survived.
That's a good point. I hadn't even thought about it. Good. Thank you. So we have the census of the men, the census of the Levites. We have the census of the firstborn. And then we have actually another census in chapter 4, another numbering, where he numbers the Levites again, but this time he numbers them from age 30 to 50, because you had to be 30 years old to actually serve as a Levite. And so they number them again, and they assign them their specific duties. What were the specific duties of the three branches of Levites, the Kohathites, the Merarites, the Gershonites? Each one had a specific duty in the service of the tabernacle. What was it?
So I said the holy thing.
Which means what?
So the showbread, the table for the showbread, the Ark of the Covenant, they were responsible for covering. Well, actually, Moses, the high priest, was responsible. Aaron, the high priest, was responsible for covering. And once covering happened, then the Philippites were responsible for the carrying of the holy things on their shoulders.
And then the Merarites?
One of hardware, the other one is software. I think the Merari or the hardware, which is tent bases and poles, and I think the Gershonites are the software, which would be the tent and covering.
Good, you got it right. So, all the supports for all, the fence, the fabric enclosure around the outside, Merarites would take the fabric, but then the supports and the bases and I don't know what they were all called, but there were certain things that the fabric hooked to, all that would be the other tribe's responsibility. Okay, again, organization in the establishment of a nation, 1 million plus people moving across the wilderness, doing it in an organized fashion. And instructions also about where they camped, how they camped. There's some specifics there that might be interesting to you. That's in chapter 2, isn't it, I believe? The arrangement of the camps. Do you see anything significant there?
The Levites are in between the people and God.
I think that's the most important point to make. God has said that I'm going to live among you, but you have got to be holy for me to be in your presence. And if at any time you become unclean, you've got to get out of my presence. You've got to go outside the camp and clean yourself and purify yourself before you can come back. And all of those rules and regulations that we read about in Leviticus now apply in terms of clean and unclean. So God has said, when we come together in a moment of encampment, I will be in the midst of you, but I don't want the regular people anywhere close to me. He tells them if they come anywhere close, they're going to fall over dead. I'm going to kill them. So he creates a buffer zone between where he is, the tent of meeting, and the 12 tribes, non-Levitical tribes. But the Levites become that buffer zone, that separation of God from sin.
Tommy, my New American reads layman. If a layman comes near, he will die.
Good. All right. Anything else on that? As they are marching through the wilderness, there's some specifics there that I don't have that in front of me, but again, there's some specific instructions about the ark leading the way, Moses and the high priest and the ark out front. Then the 3 tribes of Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and then in between them and the next group of 3, there's the tabernacle itself. And then between the next 3 tribes, the Kohathites are carrying the furniture or the rest of the specifics from within the tabernacle, the table of showbread, the ark, the altar, the candlesticks, the altar of incense, all of that would have been there. Any significance you see in any of those specific instructions on how to march across the wilderness? Specific duties of the Levites in chapter 3, verse 6. Bring the tribe of Levi near and set them before Aaron the priest that they may serve him. They shall perform the duties for him and for the whole congregation before the tent of meeting to do the service of the tabernacle. They shall also keep all the furnishings of the tent of meeting along with the duties of the sons of Israel to do the service of the tabernacle. You shall thus give the Levites to Aaron and to his sons, and they are wholly given to him from among the sons of Israel. So you shall appoint Aaron and his sons, and they may keep their priesthood, but the layman who comes near shall be put to death. So what's the difference between a Levite and a priest? Basically genealogy, right? To be a priest, you have to be a son of Aaron. To be a Levite, you simply had to be a son of Levi. And the specifics of their duties were, what's the difference between a priest and a Levite in the terms of their duties?
Well, they got to born into it, but a priest, you could only serve, you couldn't serve as a priest until you were 30 years of age. And you had to retire at 60.
50. But that's true of the Levites also.
And then, but those who were in the priesthood, or especially the high priesthood, had to be sons of Aaron.
Right? So one of my questions would be, who had to, when the sacrifices were brought to the door of the tent of meeting, or to the tabernacle, could a Levite do the sacrificial duties, or did it have to be a priest? Cut the animal's throat, catch the blood in the bowl, put the blood on the horns of the altar, put the animal ultimately after you had done the necessary things, put it on the altar and light it on fire. Did that have to be a priest? Yes, it did. The Levite was just simply involved with the maintenance of the tabernacle, not in the specifics of worship. So think of the responsibility that put on. How many priests were there that we know about now? There's only 3. Aaron, Eleazar, Ithamar. And they had a lot to do. Tons.
I think it's kind of interesting when you mentioned before that the priests, before they would really get going and cover everything, nobody was allowed to see any of that. It was so set apart and so holy from everybody else that they had including even they moved. The Kohathites did not even see it.
Good. Well, I'm just about out of things to say. What do y'all got to say? Anything else in maybe the first 4 chapters that you see?
Johnny, can you imagine if it were a man to try and organize all of these things, an uninspired man to organize 2 million people or whatever? There had to be a lot of communication somehow, right?
Right. And there were lots of problems, The book of Numbers is primarily about the problems. constant murmuring, grumbling, complaining. God, how many times did God say, step aside, Moses, I'm going to wipe them out? At least twice, maybe more than that. I'm starting over. Wasn't easy at all. But the administration is a major point. The administration, administration of rules and regulations was an important part of this first 10 chapters of the book. Anything else?
So it's interesting where they had all the different tribes around the tabernacle, around the tent. I saw one picture, they were all like side by side, and my attention was that when they were camping, they all looked towards the tabernacle, just like we should all look towards God. It was a training ground, to always keep your eyes on God on the tabernacle.
Okay, good. One little bitty thing. In chapter 4, verse 46, all the numbered men of the Levites whom Moses and Aaron and the leaders of the Israel numbered by their families and by their fathers' household, from 30 years and upward, even to 50 years, everyone who could enter and do the work of the service and the work of carrying of the tent of meeting, their number was 8,580. That's how many Levites there were from the age of 30 to 50. Over in Numbers chapter 8, verse 24, God is giving more instructions concerning the Levites. This time he's talking about retirement. And he says in verse 23 of chapter 8, now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, this is what applies to the Levites from 25 years old and upward. They shall enter to perform service in the work of the tent of meeting. But at the age of 50, they shall retire from service in the work and not work anymore. So there seems to be a discrepancy between the numbering, which was 30 to 50, and the instructions in chapter 8, where it talks about those Levites who are eligible for service in the tent, 25 to 50. And the smart man that I would take advice from says that the first 5 years of a Levite service was apprenticeship. So at 25, he would enter an apprenticeship to learn how to do all the work. And he would not officially become a tabernacle Levite until he reached the age of 30, 5 years of apprenticeship. Just an interesting difference there. Lori.
I mean, I just thought it was interesting with God found it so important to assign, the different things, the different ones to carry the hardware and the software. Even God, it says even in verse, after he assigned everything to the Merari, he said, you're assigned by name the items they were responsible to carry. So not only just this tribe you're in charge of this, now I want Tommy to carry this exact item and Lance to carry this exact item. And that's how important everything was, that it was done exactly to God's specification.
Thank you. Stuart.
I find it interesting that if you have men of war at age 20, you can't serve in the temple until age 30. Like 33 until age 30. I don't know what to make of it. It's not anything after it's not the same age.
You need a little more maturity to serve God than you need.
Tommy, in chapter 5, it's interesting. The way that an unfaithful woman was to be dealt with.
Yeah, we'll talk about that next week, or I guess whatever Craig wants to talk about. Shirley, you need to bring that up for him. Okay, appreciate all your help.
I mean, it's not that
Number 2, as the deer. As the deer pants for the water, so my soul longs after you. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. I want you more than gold or silver, only you can satisfy. You alone are the real joy giver and the apple of my eye. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you.
All right, good to see everybody out. It's really cold outside, and certainly glad for everybody who was able to make it out and be part of our Bible classes tonight. Next time we'll get an opportunity to meet together will be 9 o'clock for Bible study, followed by 10 o'clock worship on Sunday. So please make every opportunity, take advantage of the opportunity to be here if you're here, and we'll look forward to that. As far as announcements goes, Becky Cawthon, we announced on Sunday we're going to have gallbladder surgery on Monday. She did. It went well. She's had a rough couple of days recovering, and but today was much better. So continue to pray for her and her recovery. If things continue as it is, how do you phrase it? If Becky continues to show improvement in her health, then maybe Carrie and the girls will be back within the week. We mentioned Danny's surgery postponed for February 19th, and that continued on a test on February 11th, so we need to keep him in our prayers on that. Monty and Cindy Griffin are not here this morning. They are tonight. They are quarantining, and they plan on taking the test on Friday to see if they have any symptoms. But as of the last time I talked to them, they're not showing any symptoms, but they were around somebody that did have COVID-19. And I haven't gotten any additional information regarding Monty's dad and the appointment on the oncologist for tomorrow, but let's keep Monty's dad in our prayers as well. You may have seen the email that went out tonight regarding Craig's parents. Craig's mom is part of a oncology research thingamajigger, and had to go to Oklahoma City as part of that procedure, research, fill in the blank. And while they were there, Shirley had taken her to Oklahoma City for that follow-up, and they found that her hemoglobin was low and wanted her to go into the ER for a blood transfusion. And Shirley was able to talk them into letting Shirley drive Craig's mom back to Fayetteville. So she's supposed to be in Washington Regional tonight in the emergency room for a blood transfusion. And Craig is with his dad and with them at the emergency room. So Craig's under a lot of, as you can imagine, this is his job, is to be preaching and teaching, and he feels bad that he can't be here, and we certainly understand the challenges with that. But, you know, the fact of the matter is he's doing what he's supposed to be doing. He's supposed to be taking care of his parents. And so I would not expect him to be here with that kind of news. So let's keep Craig, his family, and his parents in our prayers, and pray that all will go well with the blood transfusion and the follow-up appointments. Also, Noemi and Sarah are going to be having babies in the next 10 weeks. So they're at the later stages and all the fun that comes with that. So let's keep them in our prayer that the rest of the pregnancy goes well and that the babies will be healthy as well as the moms. And the only other announcement that I have is if you're going to be out of town in the month of February, to let Barry Gathaway know so that he does not schedule you. Are there any other announcements that need to be made? Not? Hunter is going to direct us minds in a closing prayer.
Please bear with me. Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you now, thankful for this time that we have to gather together here. Lord, we ask, please bless us to always go throughout this life, proclaiming you and always doing what's right in your eyes. We ask, please be with us as we leave this place to keep us safe. Help us to always go out through this world and doing what's right in your eyes. It's your son's name that we pray. Amen.